In the silent hall of existence, all things quietly rearrange themselves, not by effort, but by absence. What you withdraw from begins to collapse. What you stop feeding with attention begins to fade. The sun does not chase the flower, yet when it withdraws, the petals close. So too does your availability shape how the world responds to you. The Buddha once said, "All suffering comes from attachment, and all attachment grows from attention." It is not the external world that holds power over you. It is your participation in it. When your availability becomes a river, flowing in all directions, everyone comes to drink. Yet few wonder where the river began. But when the river dries, even the birds fall silent, and the forest learns a new rhythm. Availability is not a virtue when offered without discernment. True compassion does not always say yes. True strength is not always being seen, and true peace is not always found in presence, but in the sacred, quiet power of withdrawal. Let us now go into the story where a seeker discovers this very truth, not through conflict, but through clarity, and in the process realizes the hidden transformation that begins when you stop being available, the one who always said yes. There was once a seeker who lived a quiet life among others. This one was always present, always near when someone called, always listening when another needed to speak, always giving, always sharing, always soft in voice, gentle in step, open in time. If there was a weight to carry, they lifted it. If there was a wound to soothe, they offered warmth. If others spoke, they silenced their own thoughts to listen. If others demanded, they complied. And for a long time, this made the seeker feel purposeful. But something began to shift, not around them, but within. What once felt like purpose began to feel like prison. What once felt like peace began to echo with emptiness. They noticed a strange pattern. Those who took the most were those who gave the least. Those who praised were only present when in need. Those who smiled were strangers to their silence, and those who claimed affection only appeared when convenience demanded it. The seeker sat in silence one evening, eyes closed, breath still, and asked, "Why do I feel hollow when I give everything I am?" In that silence, a teaching emerged, not as a voice, but as a realization. When you are always available, you are no longer valued. When you are too easy to reach, you become invisible. This truth stung like the bite of cold wind, but it was awakening. For the first time, the seeker saw that their availability was not seen as a gift. It had become an expectation. And what is expected is no longer appreciated. The roots of misplaced generosity in Buddhist philosophy, dana, the practice of giving, is a noble virtue, but it is never meant to be blind. Giving is an art only when balanced with discernment. Generosity without boundaries becomes a wound disguised as kindness. The seeker began tracing back the roots of their availability. It was not born of love but of fear. Fear of being unloved, fear of being forgotten, fear of being seen as unkind. They gave not because they had, but because they feared the absence of connection. Their yes was not a gift, it was a shield against rejection. In Zen teachings, this fear is known as Moa delusion. The delusion that we must sacrifice ourselves to be accepted. The delusion that love is earned through endless accommodation. The delusion that being available is the same as being needed. And so, the seeker decided to step back, not out of anger, not in revenge, but in clarity. The power of withdrawal. At first, nothing seemed to change. The world continued as it did. But slowly, people began to notice the absence. The one who always answered was no longer reachable. The one who always agreed now offered silence. The one who gave without being asked no longer appeared. Some were confused. Some were irritated. Some began to say, "You've changed." And they had, but not in the way others meant it. They had not become colder, they had become centered, they had not become selfish, they had become sane. In the stillness of their new life, something returned that had long been missing: self-respect. When you are no longer constantly available, people must choose to seek you with intention. When you are no longer always saying yes, your words begin to carry weight. When you stop being everywhere for everyone, your presence becomes a rare and precious offering. This is the wisdom of the Zen monk who sits by the mountain lake, not because they dislike the world, but because the world must climb the mountain to meet them. And in that climb, only the sincere will arrive. The reactions of the world. The first response to your absence is resistance. People who were used to your availability begin to accuse you of change, coldness, even arrogance. But understand this: they are not angry at your absence. They are angry at the mirror it shows them. When you stop being available, people confront the emptiness they used to fill with your energy, and not everyone is ready to face that emptiness, but some will, and these are the ones worth your time. As the seeker walked through the stillness of their life, they began to see clearly. Some relationships disappeared altogether. Some connections faded. But a few, just a few, began to reach out, not out of need, but out of appreciation. Not for what they could take, but for who the seeker truly was. This is the fruit of spiritual withdrawal, the shedding of the false and the arrival of the real. The sacred silence within Zen is the art of emptying the cup before pouring more tea. In the same way, life must be emptied of demands before it can be filled with clarity. The seeker began to spend long hours in meditation, sitting by still trees, listening to wind, practicing mindful silence. In that silence, they met themselves for the first time, no longer a servant to others' moods, no longer a reflection of others' needs, no longer a prisoner to the fear of being forgotten. They found joy not in being needed, but in being whole. This is the turning point in all spiritual awakening, when you no longer need to be needed, when you stop chasing appreciation and instead radiate presence. It is said in the Dhammapada, "The wise person does not long for company or fame, but finds delight in solitude like a deer in a quiet forest." The return without losing the self. After a long time, the seeker began to re-enter the world, not with the same old pattern, but with a new rhythm. They spoke less, but their words had weight. They gave less, but their gifts healed deeper. They appeared rarely, but when they did, their presence changed the room. They had become like the moon, absent during the day, but illuminating the night, not always visible, but always powerful. This is what happens when you stop being available to everyone. You become available to your true self. You no longer dilute your light just to keep others comfortable in their shadow. You no longer exhaust yourself trying to be seen. You stand in stillness and are felt. In Zen, detachment is not indifference, it is clarity. It is choosing where your energy goes. It is understanding that attention is a form of spiritual currency. What you give it to grows, what you withhold it from withers. So the teaching is simple but powerful. When you stop being available to everyone, you become truly available to the right ones and to your own path. A river that runs through too many fields loses its depth. But a river that flows inward becomes a lake, deep, silent, and nourishing. Let your silence teach. Let your absence speak. Let your detachment reveal what presence could not. And in doing so, watch how everything changes. Availability is a form of attachment. In the teachings of the Buddha, attachment is the root of suffering. Not just attachment to things or people, but attachment to roles and identities. The identity of being always available is often mistaken for kindness, but in truth, it may be rooted in a subtle ego, the need to be needed. The seeker, now awakened, realized that availability had become a cloak they wore for acceptance. By always being reachable, they sought validation. But true freedom begins when one no longer chases validation from others and instead lives aligned with truth, clarity, and peace. The world often teaches that you must be useful to be loved, but this teaching is false. You are not a tool. You are not an object of convenience. You are not someone's emergency exit or emotional warehouse. The seeker had unknowingly turned themselves into a utility, and when a utility breaks, people discard it. In stepping back, they saw the illusion. Love that requires constant giving is not love. Friendship that depends on your sacrifice is not friendship. Availability that is not respected is not your responsibility to maintain. This is the wisdom of Zen. When you let go of what you think you must be, you become who you truly are. Energy conservation is a spiritual practice. Every being carries a limited reservoir of energy. This is not just physical, it is emotional, mental, spiritual. When you give to everyone indiscriminately, you drain that reservoir. Eventually, you feel tired, not just in the body, but in the soul. The seeker had once wondered why exhaustion followed them even when nothing physically strenuous had been done. The answer was now clear. Their energy was leaking into places it was never meant to flow, into people who did not care, into conversations that went nowhere, into fixing problems that weren't theirs to solve. When they stopped being available, they began to conserve this sacred energy. And suddenly, they felt alive again, vibrant, peaceful, creative. They could read, write, meditate, reflect. They could hear their inner voice again. Zen calls this becoming like a still pond. When the surface is calm, you can see your own reflection, but when it is disturbed by every breeze, every passing thought, every demanding voice, you forget what you look like. Availability without awareness is self-erasure. Withdrawal with clarity is self-restoration, the illusion of being needed. The seeker once believed they were important because they were always called upon, but now they saw the trap. People didn't seek them out of love. They sought them out of habit, utility, or selfish convenience. A tree that offers fruit constantly is not always cherished. It is stripped until barren. But a tree that bears fruit in season, that guards its growth, that stands in stillness, this tree is honored. When the seeker stopped being present for every little request, many stopped coming. And this revealed a painful truth. Their value was conditional. But that pain was also liberation, because in it, they saw the illusion of being needed. In Zen philosophy, ego often hides behind service. One must examine, am I helping to relieve suffering, or am I helping to feel important? Am I present out of compassion, or am I present to avoid loneliness? When you no longer make yourself available for shallow praise, for thankless tasks, for draining people, your circle narrows, but it also deepens. And in that depth, life becomes sacred again, the gift of solitude. In Buddhist practice, solitude is not loneliness, it is nourishment. The seeker found joy in walking alone, in listening to the sound of silence, in the breath of wind, in the rhythm of their own steps, in the way the world became more vibrant without noise. They no longer felt a need to explain their silence to anyone. They no longer feared being misunderstood. They no longer apologized for not responding immediately, for not attending every gathering, for not participating in every noise of the world. This is the path of the sannyasi, the renunciate, not one who abandons life, but one who renounces noise to hear truth. In solitude, the seeker found that the voice of the universe was not loud, it was a whisper, and it had always been speaking, but it could only be heard when everything else stopped. Presence becomes power. When the seeker returned to relationships, they no longer returned as someone desperate to be liked. They no longer said yes automatically. They listened more but spoke less. And when they spoke, their words had weight. People noticed. Some began to treat them with more care. Some began to ask for permission rather than assume. Some disappeared, unable to handle the shift. But the greatest transformation was this. The seeker no longer feared who left. They only valued who stayed, and who stayed with respect. Zen teaches that true presence is not in being constantly seen, but in being felt deeply, even in absence. The moon does not appear every night in full, yet no one forgets its presence. The most powerful are not the loudest, but the stillest. When you stop being available all the time, your presence becomes a choice, and choices, when made with intention, are sacred. Boundaries are not walls, they are gates. The seeker began to understand boundaries not as walls to keep others out, but as gates that let the right ones in. They were no longer reactive. They responded from clarity, not emotion. They no longer rushed to prove anything. Their life had a rhythm now, not a constant urgency. When someone reached out, they no longer jumped in panic to reply. When someone asked for something, they paused before giving. When someone tried to provoke them, they met it with inner stillness. This was the greatest gift of withdrawal, the return of inner authority. In the words of the Dhammapada, the one who conquers himself is greater than he who conquers 1,000 men in battle. The final liberation. The day came when the seeker stood alone, not lonely, not isolated, but free. They looked back on their past self, the one who was always saying yes, always reachable, always tired, and offered silent compassion. That self was a necessary stage, but it was not the end. By stepping back, the seeker had stepped into truth. By withdrawing, they had grown roots. By being absent from noise, they had become present to life. And so the teaching concludes, when you stop being available to those who drain you, you become available to the divine within. When you stop giving yourself endlessly to those who do not value you, you start honoring your own worth. When you stop trying to be everywhere, you finally arrive where it matters most, within yourself. You owe no one your presence, but you owe yourself your peace. Walk in silence. Let your absence teach more than your words ever could. Let your availability become a conscious gift, not a habitual sacrifice. The moment you stop entertaining the wrong energy, watch how effortlessly the right energy finds its way to you. Everything begins to shift the moment you choose to step back. Why? Because you finally remember you weren't born to be used, you were born to awaken. Thanks for tuning in. If this message resonated with you, be sure to subscribe and tap the notification bell so you never miss a new video. I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let me know what kind of content you'd like to see next. Until next time, take care and stay aligned. Pukal.